Ikiru?
Yeah, hi, Terry. How are you?
Hi, I have one question.
Go ahead.
So that I'm working off of the right list. Aside from the individual questions that we went through, when you said we'll
Yeah.
go back to the general questions, you were talking about that kind of list of topics, right?
Yeah.
Specific areas for discussion.
Mhm.
Okay.
Almost ready. What time is it? Oh, there you go.
Do you have any sense of how large our audience and participants will be?
I actually, I have no idea. I don't even belong to the, I haven't paid my dues. I'm not
You have to do that now.
I will.
Hello, everybody. Are we all on?
Okay,
yes. I think most of us are on. Hi again.
hi.
Linda hasn't joined yet. Okay, we'll see. And then Prof. Okay, Prof is going to come. So that screen that says MBA is probably, let's see.
That's where Prof is going to be streaming from.
Can we resend the link, the Zoom link, perhaps, because it's really difficult to find these Zooms.
It's individual. Unfortunately, it's individualized now with our email addresses. This one is a bit different. It's not the same like a single Zoom link for all of us. So the person has to get their own email. Am I correct, Damola?
Indeed, right. You are, ma'am. Indeed, you are. And that's the reason I sent a chaser earlier today to ask everyone to please check their spam folders and their inbox.
Damola, do you mind? I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think that we have to recognize that people have so many things in their inboxes, and these links are very difficult to find. So if you can please send the link again to Dame Linder so that she can. It was difficult for me to find it. So we send her link so it's at the top of her inbox.
All right.
If possible.
He will contact the tech people. He doesn't have it. So contact tech quickly and see if you can get them to send it.
All
now,
right, then.
Patrick, in response to your question, we have 15,000 virtual delegates. 15,000.
That's very impressive. Congratulations. That is Very
Yes.
impressive. How exciting.
Moderator,
And
chairperson.
we have
we're
1
going
minute to
live.
go. Oh dear.
1 minute to go, and you're live. We're going live right now. So everybody should be ready.
I'm wondering where we'll see. Okay, yes. Okay, that's fine.
Okay. She's seated here. She's in the studio.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Dr. Balloon,
Good
moderator,
afternoon.
Dr. Balloon, we're going to
Yeah.
count down, and then you are live. We'll go from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, live.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome, a huge welcome to the NBA Women's Forum session on the equality gap, changing the status quo against stereotypes in the legal profession. My name is Dr. Nkiru Ballon, and I'm very pleased to be here. And before we go into the session, we have a wonderful surprise for you. And I'm going to hand over the microphone to Professor Bamboshe to tell us more about the surprise. Thank you. We're just waiting on Professor Bamboshe to join us. Prof, are you there? So before Professor Bamboshe joins us, I'm going to quickly introduce, I think you have everybody's profiles right now, but this session is perhaps one of the most important sessions that any organization, particularly the NBA, can have, because it's around equality and women, the role of women, not just in the law profession, but in society in general. My personal belief is that the continent really nowhere can actually get anywhere without fully and effectively engaging women. And we have some amazing speakers with us today who you all have their bios in front of you, but I'm gonna have them quickly introduce themselves, starting with Dame Linda Dobbs. Dame Linda, welcome and thank you. If you quickly introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a retired High Court judge. I retired early some years ago to sort of expand my portfolio. So now I have quite a wide portfolio. I'm the director of training at the Judicial Institute for Africa, where we do training for judges in Africa. I'm a judicial commissioner for the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. I'm the independent assessor for miscarriages of justice compensation. And currently I'm conducting a significant and long-standing review for one of our big banks.
Thank you so much, Dame Linda. Ms. Terry Mazur, if you would just quickly say a few words about yourself.
Figure out how to unmute my screen. Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Mazer. I am the chair of the New York State Bar Association's Women in Law section. My practice area is I'm an antitrust and securities litigation trial lawyer. At the moment, I actually have retired briefly, although probably I'm getting back out into the legal world soon due to some health issues. But I've practiced for over 30 years and have a wide-ranging practice, primarily in the financial industry and chemical industry. And I also have founded women's initiatives at my law firm, Mayer Brown, and I've been involved in diversity and inclusion efforts in every organization that I've been with over the years, including the other two firms I was with, Greenberg Traurig and Case Scholler. I'm so excited to be here today. This is so exciting. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Boma Alabi, thank you. And Sweet, please introduce yourself very quickly.
Hello, I am Boma Alabi. OON, you mustn't forget that.
Oh, of course, I am, you know, that's the most, I
am so proud of it.
OON.
It is nomination by civil society groups. We know that, you know, national honors don't come easy.
It is a big deal.
I see it as owner of Nigeria. That's how I refer to myself, because I own the space and want to work for the betterment of our country in the area that I am involved in, which is law and access to justice and so on. I have served as a chairperson of the Association of Women Solicitors England and Wales in the past. I have also served as the president of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, which is an association of lawyers and institutions representing lawyers from all 54 countries of the former British Empire. I am the founder of Sterling Partnership Nigeria, and more recently, a founding partner of Primera Africa Legal. And my areas of practice are quite varied. I do a lot of dispute resolution. Recently with COVID, a lot of industrial relations work, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you so much, Ms. Boma Alabi, OON, and that's that's an incredible honor, and I'm really proud to and I have to say that you're one of my role models. Actually, everybody on this panel is one of my role. I mean, you're so exciting. And last but not the least, Dr. Femi, please say a few words about yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, thank you very much. I've been a lawyer, spent a good deal of my career working in various capacities, legal capacities in international multilateral organizations. I worked at the UN, I worked at the World Bank, worked at the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And that's the main thing I've done in my most recent role as one of the Assistant Secretary Generals of the United Nations, dealing with the former criminal tribunal, the criminal tribunals of the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. That's the role I just stepped down from in June. I wanted to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, very distinguished panelists. You will notice that we don't have Honorable Rakia Ayuba Haruna here with us. She was supposed to be here, but unfortunately, she was called for an emergency and she can't be here, but she sincerely apologizes and wishes she could be here. We're going to jump straight into the conversation while we wait for this wonderful surprise that, you know, I think you're all going to be excited by. And I want to sort of like start the conversation really to the speakers to spend maybe a minute or two talking about their experience of COVID and why this is an important conversation to have around gender equality now. I think I would like to start that conversation with Dame Linda.
Well, let me speak from personal experience, and it does affect lawyers. I'm running a long investigation for a bank, and I have 52 counsel working for me. And I'm going to show off at this minute because 56% are women and 33 are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. So I'm very pleased with the composition of my team. But I've noticed the difficulties for the women on the team has been this. We can work remotely, largely because it's all on a secure platform, but they're on duty all the time with the children at home. they're the caregivers as well as working. Not many of them seem to get much support from their partners. And so I have noticed that it has put enormous stress on them, having no respite at all with the children working at home. That's one downside. Another downside for which protest has been made, but the government hasn't really listened to, is court sittings, particularly in crime. Because the courts had to close down, the backlog has been growing and growing and growing. In order to bring down the backlog, the government is going to do double sittings. So in every court, there will be double sittings, starting early till about 1 or 2 o'clock, and then starting again after there's been an hour gap to sanitize the courts. So starting in the afternoon for a court day through to the evening, which is obviously going to, the antisocial hours are obviously going to impact on the women in particular. So that is a big concern. However, on the plus side, from what I can see and looking at the legal press, is that it has raised awareness that remote working is feasible, and this should benefit women who have been denied the opportunity for flexible working from some of their employers. But I noticed that some of the city firms are already acknowledging that they will allow maybe up to 50% working at home. And I think that'll also help those who are on maternity leave. It'll help them be able to keep engaged with the firm, but also perhaps do some work if they'd like to, and do it remotely, so they can still be on maternity leave, but if they want to keep up their skills, they can do. I think also as a plus, it may reduce the opportunities for the macho culture being remote. And also, I think the opportunities for sexual harassment as well are potentially reduced in this new remote way of working. So it's not all doom and gloom, but I'm sure there's other impacts as well.
Thank you so much, Dame Linda, for that wonderful, I'm going to come back to that, to the speakers. But before I do that, let's go to Professor Bamgbose. Well, I've just been told that we're not actually going to bother with the awards anymore. So I'm really sorry, I apologize. So we're just gonna go straight into the conversation, yay. So we are going to go on with the awards, but not, Sir, can I just have a minute to find out if we're going to go on with the awards or not?
If I could just say that the award ceremony is actually going on the physical location, but it's not being streamed into the Zoom platform. And so we're happy that award ceremony is going on, and Nkiru, you're okay to continue with the panel session. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Chinyere. So Dame Linda, you were talking about the culture, macho culture, and sexual harassment maybe being less with COVID, and the idea of remote working now being feasible, which sort of like allows women to have flexible working hours. Of course, the other side of it is that with the COVID thing, the hours are so long and women are having to bear the brunt of that. So perhaps we'll have Ms. Boma jumping very quickly to sort of like talk about her experience and what she thinks about this COVID era and flexible working hours for women generally.
Well, for us, the COVID pandemic has had a very major impact. I mentioned that I do a lot of work in dispute resolution. What I didn't mention was also that I prosecute as well as defend criminal cases, prosecution on the fiat of the Attorney General of one of the states and criminal defense in another state. And none of those matters have been able to proceed because of the COVID pandemic. So at March, when we were locked down, we had dates to the end of the to the end of April, I think, for about 40 cases. None of those have gone on. None of those have been released. These individuals are in detention awaiting trial. So it's been a sad further delay to their finding out their fate one way or the other, so that they're either released or they begin to serve their time, particularly those who are innocent, because they don't get any compensation when they're released if they're found innocent, regardless of how many years they spend in detention. From a gender perspective, like Linda said, we tend to be the caregivers, and I have a 10-year-old little girl at home. So I had to very quickly ensure that she had her own computer and access to the internet, because she was working, going to school from home, you know, virtual schooling at the same time as I was working virtually from home. The welcome impact of COVID was, I found that for 3 months, I didn't board an aircraft. I didn't have to sleep in a hotel room. That has never happened in my entire working life of nearly over 32 years. So that was fantastic. Also, virtual birthday parties and virtual funerals are much cheaper in our own jurisdiction than the actual thing. So that was absolutely positive. I think moving on from there, yes, we impacted, we also started flexi working in our workplace so that our colleagues could be socially distant and all that, and we quite like it. So I think that's going to continue. It's going to allow the colleagues, the women in our group and men who might need to work from home from time to time. So all in all, I think there's been a silver lining to that pandemic from our perspective.
It's really nice to have, you know, I think when people say, oh, there's been silver linings to the pandemic and COVID, it sounds a little bit, you know, that it shouldn't be. But I think with life, everything can be an opportunity if we allow it. So like looking at your glass half full rather than half empty is obviously the point we're making here. And it's a nice way of, because the point you were making about being a trial lawyer and having all these cases not listed and people are waiting, it's a good way for me to segue to talk to Terry Mazur, who herself is a trial lawyer and has done, you know, really complex cases. How has COVID, very briefly, impacted your work and the work of the people and the lives of the people you're working with? And how do you think is it important in terms of the question around gender equality and bridging the gap?
Thank you. In reverse, I do think it's very important around gender equality and inequality and helping to right some of these issues. Our court system has stopped completely. We're just reopening for some on a very slow basis for in-person matters. There have been some emergency hearings have been allowed, depending on the state you're in. There's been more and less virtual appearances for now. The Supreme Court of Delaware has been holding oral arguments by Zoom. New York is starting to do that. There have been some motion practice and things like that. So at the moment, it's still a very, the actual trial and motion practice in the United States is still quite cut back. However, all the cases are going on. So discovery and everything around it is going, and in many cases, the judges haven't really altered the time schedule. So it's an interesting background because everyone's pushing to get things done and no one knows when your hearing's actually going to be. But I agree. I think there is a real silver lining to the COVID and to having everyone have been quarantined and the emphasis on virtual communications at this point for women and for the firms and in the public sector as well. And this is why I say that women here, as in Nigeria, have been pushing quite a bit over the years for, you know, the time to be able to have flex hours, do some work from home. That while it's been allowed, I do think it's been met with a bit of skepticism by men and by management at many law firms. I think the opportunity on the upside of being quarantined with COVID is that now everyone has had to work from home. So all of a sudden, our male colleagues are learning that they too can work at home. It can be meaningful. They can reach out to clients. They can market. To the extent there's court appearances and negotiations and any ongoing deals that are still left, those things are taking place. I have two children. I have an 11 and a 13-year-old and a 21-year-old in college, and like most and a husband who is a lawyer also. So we're all quarantined together in our house. Even now, and my husband's very good at participating in childcare, but most of it still falls to me. So, you know, just as at the office, you know, my workload is a little bit heavier, I think, and it's not a problem. I love my kids. I love doing what I do, but you know, women tend to take more of the brunt of childcare. However, I think spouses and basically the male population is seeing that it can all work. And that just because you're doing it from home doesn't necessarily mean you're not effective, you're not a real lawyer, you're not capable of delivering the same high quality product that you do when you're in the office or in a conference room with all the people. So I think that this will help show people that this can be done, and that going forward, there will be less resistance and less negativity towards women who need to work remotely some of the time, should we ever get back to a more fulsome practice in the office.
Kira, can I ask a question?
Sure.
To everybody, it's a general question. One of the things that we're doing, our courts, our physical courts are up and running, but obviously on a much more limited scale, hence the double sitting. But we've been doing a lot of remote hearings in civil cases in particular, but some criminal cases, interlocutory applications in criminal cases. Really, it's a question, what do people think? Because I know our Chief Justice is very keen on going down the technological route as a result of COVID. It's sort of brought forward plans that were somewhere in the distance. They've now been accelerated and brought forward to now. And I'd just be interested, I think people might be interested in knowing what people's views are and how that could impact women, not only the lawyers, but also, for instance, family cases and things where I think that, I don't do family, but I'm guessing that intimate one-to-one is actually very important indeed. So I think it would be quite interesting to canvass that.
So thank you, Dame Linda, for that. I'm gonna please hold that thought, because I'm gonna direct that question to the trial lawyers in the room, Boma and Terry. But before we do that, I just want to bring in Dr. Elias, who I don't think you are actually a trial lawyer. I think you're a professor, but maybe you are a trial lawyer. You'll tell us more about that. But I wanted to sort of bring your thoughts around the silver lining conversation, how working from home has been a silver lining to an extent, but also women are finding that they still bear the brunt of the burden because they're working full-time and also being full-time moms, full-time cooks, full-time everything. But also there's the other women, the other side of it, which we're not really talking about, which is not everybody has access to the internet, particularly here and on the continent. How about those women who are finding that the silver lining is actually a disaster because there is an increased level of domestic violence because people are cramped? That's one angle of it. So from a man's perspective, how do men support women who are working from home? But also, how do we look at this increased issue of domestic violence in terms of working from home that COVID has actually brought?
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, first of all, in terms of what I do, it's interesting. I'm not a trial lawyer myself, but in my last role, where I served as an assistant secretary general in the UN, it was a position of, it's called a registrar of these criminal tribunals that I mentioned. It's the successor bodies to the tribunals that were set up for genocide and war crimes that happened in Rwanda and Yugoslavia. Specifically, you'd mentioned particularly on the continent, well, the Rwanda tribunal was based in Arusha, Tanzania, and that's where certainly where I was all through the COVID pandemic. And as I said, I finished my term in that position now. This was all the people that worked in my institution, the overwhelming majority were lawyers. Very many of them were trial lawyers. Those tribunals have been around for a long time, and much of their trial work is reduced. There's still some going on, but definitely during this time, all the trial work was suspended. It's, I'm sure sooner or later, some of it has started going on again, and the branch in the Netherlands, the Yugoslavia branch, they started a appeal hearing the other day. But much of what has been said is exactly what our experience has been. Many things have been put on hold for now. A lot of effort to do as much as we can in the circumstances. But how does that affect the staff? Well, first of all, again, not to mean bragging, certainly in the context of international organizations, and I hope there'll be time to talk a little bit more about this. Certainly in our institution, there's gender parity is it's an institutional objective. As a result of that, in my institution, we actually have more female lawyers than male lawyers. We'll talk a little bit about how that was done and the steps taken to achieve that. But we've had to deal with this a great deal. Very many colleagues have to stay at home, looking after children who were not going to school because of the lockdown. All the points that were made by the previous speakers, all of them are absolutely true. Very difficult on the one side because they're on all the time, they're working all the time, having to stagger their work between demands of childcare, etc. On the other hand, showing us the possibilities of the lockdown. Maybe it's not a silver lining, but certainly there's some rethinking to be done, some new ways of looking at. Definitely be things for the future. Now, domestic violence. This is a challenge. It is not something that I've come across in practice in terms of my experience, if this is what the question is about, in terms of staff, my colleagues, reporting this as being a real issue. The main things we've had to deal with have been the same things that previous speakers have talked about, just being all the time, being on, working all the time, having to stagger work with. The important thing is that we required flexibility. A great deal of flexibility was required to allow for these unprecedented and unexpected family situations. And I think real possibilities have been opened there. I think the way things are going to be from now on, particularly in the civil service, because that's what the United Nations is, it's an international civil service, public sector. I think the way things have been done will need to be rethought a great deal. Now, in terms of the domestic violence angle, I think that is a challenge everywhere. Like I mentioned, it's not something that in practice, while I was in those positions, I had to deal with specifically. But it's obviously a very, very important thing. We've heard all the reports about it. And this is something I would certainly look forward to learning more about in the course of this discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Doctor. I think I'm going to use that a little bit to segue to Ms. Boma OON. I'm going to be talking about this a lot. I wanted you to sort of maybe, if possible, link Dame Linda's question around courts working remotely now, and then a little bit about your work, because you actually deal with a lot of issues, trial cases around rape and all sorts of things. The increased incidence, obviously, of violence that we're seeing, I think, particularly for lawyers and professional women who are really not able to talk about these things. They were very, very shy to talk about this kind of problems. So how do you think that in terms of our cultural norms, we're disadvantaged by some of the things that we see in our culture in terms of being a lawyer or even or really any profession? What's your experience, and how do you think that the legal profession can actually support women better who are facing some of these issues?
Thank you, Akiru. And I'll start with the domestic violence issue. In Nigeria, certainly, it is a wide problem. It's a recurrent problem. In fact, culturally, it's almost accepted that women are to be beaten. Sadly, I mean, if you watch any Nollywood movie, bar none, there will be no movie that you can watch from the beginning to the end without a woman being gratuitously assaulted. And so that is a reflection of the culture, because the Nollywood movies talk about the realities of everyday people in Nigeria. May not be your reality or mine, but it is pervasive and it's culturally accepted in a lot of our cultures, and it has to stop. Women need to lead the charge on this, because if you have, for instance, a mother-in-law saying to you, well, I have to put up with this from my son's father, and don't worry, when he gets old, he will have no energy to beat you up. That's just not acceptable. And those are some of the things you hear from young women, live with anything, but do not divorce this man, because culturally, it's just not acceptable. That is beginning to change, and I'm glad to hear it, because really, objectively speaking, every domestic violence incident is a potential homicide. Because when you attack a person in such an uncontrolled way, with all the dangerous things around the house, I mean, look at the accidents that happen at home. They could easily die, even if that was not your intention. So culturally, we have to change that culture by speaking out and saying it is zero tolerance. We've got to support women who are going through these things, professional women and non-professionals, and say it's all right not to live with this. The churches and the mosques should be at the forefront, because right now they're saying stay with whatever it is until death do you part. And that messaging needs to change. On Linda's question about virtual court sittings and the impact on trial lawyers, again, we would welcome more virtual court sittings. We would welcome this pandemic being effectively the driver to our courts using technology more. We know that our courts are infrastructurally challenged. I've been in the courtroom where, the power failure happens, power outage, as we often have here. Generator hasn't come on, so the backup power is not yet working. And the conscientious judge, determined to get through his huge caseload of about 30 matters that day, carried on with the help of the light from his phone. Now, if that's the situation you're facing currently, it's a far great leap forward to get the infrastructure and support you need to go virtual. We have had practice directions enabling virtual court sittings. I know it's going to take a bit of time before that will be implemented, but we can start with, the small things, filing virtually, and just ensure that the processes, we don't have to be going in and out of the registry to file those processes. Anything that's not too contentious can be done virtually. And that way, all that you have left to deal with is the actual trial itself. And actually, within my firm, we have had, and this is going back nearly 4 years ago, a matrimonial case where the petitioner, who was in fear of her life and did not want to come to Nigeria, we made an application to the court, which was granted, and she gave evidence via a video link. So it has been done, it can be done. On the female lawyers who travel, because again, we cover the whole country, unlike New York, where you're, called to a state bar. Once you're called to the bar in Nigeria, it's nationwide. So today you might be in Ibadan, tomorrow you might be in Damaturu, the next day you'll be in Sokoto, Abuja, and so on. And there's a lot of sexual exploitation by seniors, junior female colleagues who travel with them for these cases. Now that has to stop. The virtual sittings will mean that they don't have to travel so often, but even beyond that, the Nigerian Bar Association should put some policy in place to ensure that there's clarity as to how juniors are treated when they travel with their seniors. And they have recourse to the NBA in the event that, things don't go as expected. Like you rightly said, a lot of women are afraid or ashamed, which they shouldn't be, to go to the police and report domestic violence. But if there are rules around it, particularly for the profession, that says, you know what, if this happens, and it can happen in the workplace. We've seen videos of lawyers being attacked and effectively physically attacked in their workplace by seniors and colleagues. It fortunately doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And there should be rules that make it clear that it is zero tolerance for those. Thank you.
Kiru?
Yes.
Kiru?
Sorry, go ahead.
Can I just pick up on the last thing that she's saying, just for information's sake?
Please
The Bar Council has, when I was chair of the Race Relations Committee, we didn't have any codes or policies in place, and we started working on an equality code, and it took us an awful long time to get there, but we got there. Now they're even more developed. They've got equality and diversity rules. These are mandatory. Every set of chambers has to have an equality and diversity officer. They have to have proper policies in place, including sexual harassment, including things like parental leave. They have to submit statistics to the Bar Council. The Bar Council monitors. How effectively, I don't know, because it's a while since I've been there, but in principle, they monitor. They have a helpline for women who've been, this is lawyers, women barristers who've been subjected to sexual harassment, that they can get in touch with and get advice. The Bar Council and the Bar Regulator, because they're two separate bodies now, they were one once upon a time, both issue guidelines and guides to assist chambers in the proper approach to looking at things, and to assist people who have been subject of maybe harassment, sexual harassment, as to what they can do. So there's a Women in Law pledge from the Bar Council. So all these things are in place. They're currently, as I understand it, updating their diversity and equality rules, but these things are now in place. It's taken a long time, but they are now in place and they're mandatory.
Thanks, Dame Linda. So I think that's actually a good point, a good place to stay at this whole, because in terms of, domestic violence, sexual harassment, all of that, that's a key reason why women drop out of their profession as lawyers. It's an important reason. And it seems like when we're having this conversation, we sort of put the onus on women. Oh, what did you do? What can you do better? Why don't we sort of like have a conversation around, what Dame Linda's talking about, the equality code. What can the NBA do better? What can law firms do better? And so I want to start that conversation with Terry in terms of the New York Bar Association, your work there, and then we can sort of like have a broader conversation around that.
Sure. Well, what we have done is the Women in Law section, which we only recently became a full-fledged section. For more than 30 years, we were a committee of 50 women, and 2 years ago, we petitioned the executive committee of the bar to make us a full-fledged section, because we felt that it was way past time that the country's largest bar association didn't have a full women's section to cover issues like harassment, pay inequity, all the diversity issues and things like that, and have a really fulsome discussion. So one of the things that we said to the executive committee when we asked for this was that we really need to work on these things more and more, even though there's a separate diversity committee to the New York State Bar Association. Our petition was granted on the spot, and we went from 50 people to now, less than 2 years later, over 1,000 members, men and women. And I think as a bar association, the NBA, like the New York State Bar Association and others, can really be very active in this in many ways. As the women's section, we work on several fronts. We have a legislative affairs committee, which examines any legislation coming down the pipeline that can impact women, women lawyers, women generally, things like equal pay, health issues, revenge porn, which is sadly a growing situation here, and I assume elsewhere in the world, all these kinds of issues. So we pick them up, we review the legislation, we comment on it and help support it, and take it through the legislative process with the Bar Association's lobbyists if necessary. So one way an association can do this is to physically be involved in legislation that can help eradicate some of these issues. We also have a very strong presence in the diversity community. We pair with the diversity committees of other sections of the Bar Association. We do extensive programming around gender issues, around things that will help women advance professionally, how to reach the corner office, how to reach, the general counsel's position, or in the public sector to advance much more than we have in the past. And we focus on the barriers and things that are slowing us down. One thing we have found, and I think this is important for all of us attacking this issue, is that it cannot just be the women. We need men as well. We have to have the support of the men. The men are still largely leading the way in law firms and the public sector. Bar associations, there's far more men still than women, even though we, like Nigerians, are graduating 50% women from our law school classes and have been for years. So to engage the men in the conversation and to have them help us eradicate and come up with ways to reform our various systems and practices to advance women equally is a very important thing. But we as women need to speak on it. We have done in-depth research into the inequities and what things seem to be holding us back. The ABA just released a report about women of color and women with disabilities and how the inequity impacts them even more in the United States than all of us, than just the general white woman population. Shedding a direct light, I think, on the issues will help even it out over time, because until there's a spotlight on it, everyone tends to ignore it or say, yes, that's fine. Many law firms for years have rolled along, giving more prominence, setting up women's committees, women's initiatives and things like that. And they have more women partners now, but the women partnership has been kind of stymied for equity partners at about 18 to 20% now for years. When you include non-equity women, it grows to 25 to 30%. So the pipeline is improving, but all these things continue. And I think that coming back to the Bar Association again, showing a very active, concerted front on these issues to the public, to the legal profession public, and to the public of our countries can really help open the conversation and get it going. And I have to say, the Me Too and the harassment issues over the last couple of years really percolating up into the public's forefront of our public discussion has made a big difference, because now people feel safer I think in the law firm environment, mostly, I'm sure it's not all 100%, but to actually bring the claim or say this is happening, which once it gets out in the open and the perpetrators of this are dealt with, I think, again, the law firm world and in-house and every aspect of the law profession will start to deal with it more fairly and not stigmatize the victims of the harassment and the abuse so much as put it on the right place on the perpetrators and really start preventing it more actively. Sorry, I'm not sure I answered all your questions, but.
That's fantastic. I will stay on that, and I sort of talk to bring in Femi to talk a little bit about that in terms of, I think you talked about Me Too and harassment, and didn't specifically mention Time's Up, but Time's Up is like a whole bunch of lawyers who
Yes.
are now taking action.
My law school classmate is the head of Time's Up, so it's actually helping a great deal. So.
Oh, exactly. So fantastic. So Femi, I'd like to bring you in on that, because we've been talking about, Terry was talking about the women's sector now being full-fledged when we are at the Women's Forum. I remember when I was coming into this conversation, I had someone send me a message, which I shared with the NBA. Why is it called a Women's Forum? If we're trying, there's no men's forum. If we're trying to have a conversation about being equal but different, or whatever we want to call it, why is it a women's forum? And that's one of the reasons that men still don't take it seriously, because of the women's forum. So obviously there's a space for safe spaces, but also how do we bring in the men to have a serious conversation, to have them understand, as Boma said, and has been quoted a few times, saying that half of the world are women. Like half of us are women. You have women lawyers graduating, and then it gets to the top, they start sort of like, the numbers start decreasing. So Femi, what do you think is the role of the man, of men in society generally, but as lawyers?
Thank you. Good question. Very important question. Yes, we've looked at this. This is something that was pointed out to me, even in this conversation, even in this panel. A number of people that I told about it said, "Oh, you're the only man there," and that did strike me. I think it's definitely the case that this is a conversation that needs to be had. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, as has been noted by many speakers here. The issue is that the men are the one still in positions of power, of authority in these areas. So if one needs to affect meaningful change, definitely they have to be a very, very important part of that conversation. The most important issue here is raising the issue, bringing it to the forefront through the various processes, various media that have been explained by previous speakers, different approaches, different initiatives, different bodies being set up within each, offices. Again, talking about the International Civil Service of the UN, this is something for which, of course, the Secretary General, the previous Secretary Generals have always taken very seriously in terms of providing regulations and guidelines and practices within the organization for gender equality, sexual harassment, domestic violence. All of these issues are things that are very, very seriously regulated. And bringing it up, the conversation cannot seriously be had without the involvement of men. Not only because they're an authority, but because they're the ones who perpetuate, who commit, who perpetrate these offenses, as it were, that we talk about all the time. So I think the role of the men is important. I am absolutely confident in my experience and people I've worked with that men are very, very open to this kind of discussion. And as I said, it's something for which continuing education is important, not in the sense of formal classes and certifications, but it needs to be kept out there in the open. And I think a great deal of positive work is being done in this regard. It's not something that's just confined to law, but the legal profession is a part of wider society. So it's not that we just stick to do it within the legal profession alone. A lot of it is affected by what happens outside. But I think it is clear that I certainly in my experience, the men I know will be very, very happy to continue to engage in this issue. Many of them realize the importance of these initiatives, importance of gender parity, importance of the role of women in society. As you keep mentioning, half the world are women, but the other half are men. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. The men, I'm sure I can speak for men. I think we're ready and willing and happy to discuss this. But the more engaged, the better it is.
We're very happy to hear that the men are ready to support. That's encouraging. I'm going to sort of like, based on talking to you and talking about initiatives that have been useful or are useful, I want to bring in Dame Linder again to talk about. I remember reading somewhere about some of the initiatives that we could have to support women and get them closer to the top is through quotas and making sure that they're allotted, enough, so if you have 50 women, you have 50 men, and making sure that women have quotas. And I read somewhere a quote about you saying that you didn't actually agree with quotas in terms of helping women. And I want you to talk a little bit about that in terms of how women, if you don't agree with quotas, what do you then think will be great solutions to the issues of getting more women in senior positions?
All right. Can I just pick up on something Femi said first about the men? I think as a general observation, it's easier in what I would call public bodies to have that conversation because they've already got the policies and things in place, and therefore it's easier. And you will see more women, as Femi says. They've got a lot of women in their organization, so I think it's easier in that kind of landscape to have the conversation. In private practice, I think it's much harder, but you've got to target the senior partners, the men, and I think you've got to not only target them, you've got to target the government. I see there's problems with CEDAW and the legislature, but go for the executive. You've got to target the regulator, you've got to target the Nigerian Bar Association. All these people are people who have the ability to make change and to assist in making change. So you've got to make a case for it. And the case, it seems to me, you just have to look at the research they've done in the UK on women on boards. There've been a couple of important reports on it where they then, at the end, recommended targets, and I'll come on to that in a minute. They recommended targets for the FTSE 100 and FTSE 250. Now, not everybody reached their targets, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But you've got to make a case for women. What they found is that in well-performing corporations, the better ones were where they had women on boards. So there is a case to be made, and there is a case to be made in the law as well. Can I go back to that quote? That quote was, I have to say, probably about 15 years ago, but at least 10 years ago that I said that. When I was in that space about no quotas. As the years have gone on, I've got closer and closer to the idea of quotas. But can I just say, I think what I was talking about when I said that, I think it was during a talk, and I got misquoted by the press, and there was this headline, I think it was the Daily Mail or one of the papers, which said top black judge advocates quotas. So I had to send this hurried email to all the judiciary saying I did not say that at all, in fact, because I knew all the hate mail that was going to come my way once they'd read the headline. At the moment, quotas are presently illegal in our country. Contrast that with South Africa, where they're mandatory to right the historical wrongs. And I think what was going through my mind at the time was there was a lot of antagonism about the idea of quotas when they were being discussed. And it potentially makes for bad relations, unless there is a culture of acceptance that it is fair to have quotas. And as you can probably guess, that is a very high hurdle to overcome, irrespective of Femi saying the men are ready for the conversation. Because even though we have no quotas now, you still hear men complaining that they've been passed over for a woman. And the inference being the woman was only appointed because she was a woman. So that is a huge hurdle to try and change that culture. Women have been subdued for so long, and that's a wrong, but you can't right the wrong and put us out. So that's one of the problems. That was one of the problems I think I saw. Another issue that I think I was referring to at the time was because women had been held back, there may not be the talent pool immediately available to fulfill the quotas. So there's that risk of catapulting someone into a job that they're not ready for. Well, of course, the solution is to ensure that they have a good support system, because people grow into jobs, especially if they're talented. However, there is a risk of increasing that existing prejudice, and it could be used as a justification for not promoting women. If they can just point to one example where somebody who was over promoted because they were a woman under a quota, that will be the example you'll get to show why women shouldn't be promoted. And I think that's why I was nervous about quotas. I am a fan of targets, however, and I'm getting closer to quotas, I have to say, but I am a fan of targets. All businesses have targets, and why not have targets for recruiting women? In my jurisdiction, as in Terry's, it's a double whammy, you're black and female. So one has to deal with that disadvantage. I've already talked about the report on into women on boards, how there has been change and positive change, and actually we can see the results in the companies that are performing well, that have women on boards. Having targets, in my mind, concentrates minds. Let me give you a personal example. I became the chair of the Powerlist 100 selection panel. The Powerlist 100 is an annual publication of the 100 most powerful Black Britons, and it comes out every year. And when I got on, I decided there were two main things I wanted to do. I wanted to broaden out the backgrounds of these people on the list, because we had an awful lot of high-flying financial people who made a lot of money, and stars of one sort or another, sports people making lots of money. But we didn't have that broad range from public sector, academia, and things of the like. And there's amazing talent out there. So that was one of my aims. The other aim was for parity, because at the time when I took it over, I think there was about a third of women in the list. The year before last, we got to parity and we had 50-50. Last year, we had more women than men. And we also had I think it was 6 out of the top 10 were women. This year, I can't give away too many secrets for next year's list, but we're doing okay on that score, if I can put it that way. And what did we do? It wasn't done by reducing standards. And that's always the implication, that if you start casting your net wide and pulling in people or having quotas, you're going to reduce standards. Whenever there's objection to that in the judiciary, they keep on talking about, merit. People have to be chosen on merit, as if you're not merit worthy. It wasn't done by reducing standards. It was by looking harder. It was by canvassing wider. And I was saying, get out there and find these people. And I have to tell you, the people are there and they are absolutely amazing. And that's what we need to do. And again, I was somebody who had the power to do it. So it goes back to the original thing that we said. You have got to get the people on board who have the power and who are able to effect change. You've got to get them on side if you're going to make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very insightful contribution. I wanted to just quickly say, toot my own horn a little bit, to say that I actually was a recipient of the Powerlist UK International Award last year. So yay to me. Yes, thank you very much. Yes. I think that those points are really, really strong. And the idea of quotas and targets. And I like what you said at the end about, making sure that whether we decide to go with quotas or targets, somebody has to actually be in the position to say, we're going to be doing this. So it's maybe usually the government or firms or people in authority, people in power say, we're going to institute targets because we want to hire more women. I also want to make a note to say that when it comes to merit, it's always, are the women good enough? Nobody's asking how terrible the men are who've been destroying companies and bringing recessions and all of those things. Nobody's talking about that. But once there's a woman who's done something small and bad, it's like, these horrible women. So turning that conversation a little bit into when you have people in the right position. Boma, I want to move that question to you around, I remember, I think it was earlier this year or last year, where we had a senator beat up a woman in public, and the courts then said that there is no evidence, and so he's still a sitting senator. And so how are we going to have people who are making rules and instituting these targets if the people who are, in the position to do that are actually not going to do it?
Thank you for that question. Very quickly, that is not the case at all. It's maligning the courts. What happened was the matter was thrown out for lack of diligent prosecution. So the court can only proceed if the prosecution actually comes and diligently prosecutes their case. They had no choice in the matter, but it means that it can be relisted because he's not been acquitted. Yes, those in power need to be brought on board. And we can do that by having a forum like this and other fora where we, first of all, distill the issues, and then we know what exactly we're going to be taking to them. So for instance, we need more structure around the Nigerian Bar Association and practice for our practitioners. This forum can begin that conversation with the Nigerian Bar Association to say there should be a minimum wage. This is a profession where lawyers are paid less than drivers. I know that for a fact in some parts, some practices in this country. There should be a minimum wage. There should be a suggested minimum at every level, because women are not very good at advocating for pay equity. And there's so much mystery, secrecy shrouded around, reward in the profession here. And that should be more open. So that's a good starting point. And then once the Nigerian Bar Association has come on board, it will be easier for us to reach the executive and the government and the regulators. But we can start with our professional representation and ensure that the representative of the profession and regulator of the profession is on board and putting structure around things to ensure equality across the two, gender parity. Thank you.
Thank you, Boma, for that. Thanks for correcting me about maligning the courts. This was actually reported in the newspapers widely. All the headlines said, this magistrate didn't do this and all of that stuff. So headline news. But I think that's actually a really important thing to talk about, how we, information and the importance of being informed. And I'm going to stick to Nigeria and the situation in terms of information. And so you might have a court do wonderful things and still the work on ground or the effect on ground is not apparent. I'll speak a little bit about the Supreme Court ruling in terms of inheritance, and which was, the Supreme Court said that the Igbo customary law, this is an important point for me because I'm Igbo, the Igbo customary law that says women cannot inherit property is, repugnant to natural justice, repugnant to everything. And that's a Supreme Court ruling, which means that it's law. But you have people still saying in the East that this is, rubbish. This is, that the courts have no power. So how we need to do controls for people that's very people on tonight. But all hands are on deck. We'll come. Sorry, I think it's a thank you. So how do we look at the conversations and on ground in terms of how do you actually make sure that law is not just law on paper, but actually law in effect? Like, the effect of law is actually felt by women, because it's a very important thing for women, particularly women in the East. I think, Femi, if you want to jump in on that, and then I'll have Terry sort of use her own experience to see how we can be more activists as the MBA or as lawyers, both men and women.
Thank you. That's a very, very important point. And it goes back to some of the things that we have said earlier today about education. You have the law. The Supreme Court has said this is the law. It's repugnant. This is the position. And people might say that is rubbish, but it's the law. This comes down to a question of actually enforcing it. There's a law, it's not enforced. Hopefully the people whose entitlements are not being respected again, can have resort to the courts again, get another judgment, but that won't solve the problem. We just keep perpetuating the question of enforcing the laws. But this is ultimately about giving effect to the laws. That's what this is about. In that respect, I'll wait for the second half of the question. As you said, how do what role can the NBA play in ensuring that these things are effective? But this seems to be a more general thing. From what you said, there are people on the ground who think this is some court in Abuja talking about things, but that's not how we do things over here. That's not part of our culture. The solution to this is not something that can be, aside from the enforcement point, it's about attitudes. It's about, this is something that's going to take a long, long time for people to start getting on board with this. It's beyond the legal. It's beyond the legal tradition. These things are rooted in history and tradition, social, political institutions. A comprehensive approach over time is something that's going to be needed. Advertising, media, people have mentioned portrayal of some of these attitudes in films, in the music industry, the media. All these things are going to play a very, very important part to have people change their attitudes in this respect. But speaking strictly as a lawyer, the thing is, we have the law there. That's what the law says. Whoever's entitlement have been questioned, NBA can probably give them as much support as possible to ensure that these kinds of things are brought to the forefront as much as possible. But for me, I think that the starting point is the law. If this is what the Supreme Court says, the next step is how to put it into practice.
Terry, I'd like you to comment on that, to take the other side of the question, which is like, how do you actually implement laws effectively? So you have a Supreme Court ruling, but it's not actually the impact of it isn't felt. So how would you see that from your perspective, and what can we learn from you?
Certainly, and let me actually, before I get to that, point out that the United States had a very similar issue. Women historically were not allowed to own property. Once they married, any of their own inheritance went to their spouse. And that lasted from kind of the original settling of the United States until 1919, basically when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was passed and women were granted the right to vote. Between the Civil War time, which is starting about 1860, 1863, the suffrage and women's right movement began in the United States. It took 70 years for women to get these rights. And as we've been noting, it's not going to happen overnight. It happens because of persistence, because people are committed to seeing the process change, to making sure that the law, which the Supreme Court, I totally agree. I mean, it is the law of the country that women are allowed to inherit. I think what has to happen now is there has to be specific action, and whether it's starting to educate the people in the areas that say, well, that doesn't apply to us. This is how we've always lived. This is how our culture has worked. I mean, they need to be re-educated. They need to know that it's the law. There has to be consequences for violating such an important law and for, disenfranchising financially and otherwise the women who are impacted by this. One thing as a bar association, two things actually. We can be proactive in effort to, I don't know whether it's through committees or people, but to activate people to go out and talk and do presentations, whether to women, to the men that are continuing to follow the old cultural ways. You can also, this kind of comes back to our earlier conversation, but create a committee within your women's forum. And we've had the same issue, there's no men's forum, but the men have been having a forum pretty much nonstop until now. So it's been the men's forum. But anyway, you can start something, we call it our champion committee. We have actively recruited men who are interested in helping advance women as lawyers to help us. And so they've joined the section, they've joined the committee, and we hold pretty frank conversations over very difficult issues. And this would be a perfect one. How do you deal with the segment of the population who wants to ignore the Supreme Court's ruling on this and continue to follow the historical, cultural path they're on? So it can start on I think it has to happen on a grassroots level. I think you have to make women feel empowered, that they need to know that it is the law and there are avenues for them. Perhaps it is starting pro bono efforts to help the women fight in court if they need to get their inheritance and just to stop this conduct. But I really think it has to be on a very specific grassroots level.
Thanks, Terry. I'm going to take a few questions from the chat, but I'm going to move that question to Boma yourself. In terms of how we can get more women to the top, more women understanding their rights, it seems to me that Terry's response is like, we also need the men to speak up. And in men speaking up, so let's talk about number of partners and law firms, number of SANs. Men are the ones who are making these decisions. So what do you think we should be doing about having more women in decision-making spaces, whether it's at the Senate, because if you had women in the Senate, you wouldn't have men beating up women, whether it's at SAN, how do you think we can engage men better to speak up for women?
Well, it's all about economic empowerment, in my view, because if you're financially independent, it's a lot easier to make your views known. If you're financially in a comfortable place, again, it's a lot easier to do the things that you need to do in order to make it to the coveted rank of the Senior Advocate of Nigeria. In addition to practice, you're supposed to have done quite a lot of public service and so on in order to show that you're a leader. And if you're eking out a living, you just simply haven't got the time, even if your heart is there to do those things that you're required to do. So if we start small, I believe in taking small steps, as they have done in England and as they have done in the States. Let's start with this profession where we can advocate. We've got the Women's Forum. The Nigerian Bar Association can start by putting more structure around practice, so women are adequately rewarded for their work in the profession. They can start by making sure that any committees of the bar have equal gender representation. We have sufficient female lawyers who are as competent as their male colleagues. But what tends to happen most often is those who are most vocal are the ones who are rewarded. And men and women communicate and engage differently. That's just a fact. Even in my own practice, I have structures in place, obviously. So there is a level, and the earning is equal for every level in practice. But when it comes to the most senior, which is at partner level, our rewards can vary. And I had to quickly put in place a similar structure when I found that inadvertently, one was beginning to give more reward to a male partner because he was just more vocal about his needs than to the female partners who were quiet and just getting on with things. So one had to be conscious in order to redress that. And that is why I said, within this profession at least, the Nigerian Bar Association has the power to make these changes. And this forum should be a place where we advocate this for those changes to happen. Now, in the places like the Nigerian Senate and so on, yes, they're elective positions. And again, it's about economic ability, networking, and so on in order to get selected by your party, in order to then get voted in as a senator or a member of the House of Reps. Women do not have that. A lot of women are not economically empowered. Networking is difficult because of the cultural norms, because a lot of these meetings happen late at night. And if you're seen out at 2 a.m., they think you're a loose woman or something, if you pardon the very archaic language, but that's the reality of our society. And therefore, that is why you find so few women in having been elected into political positions. However, those appointments, which are not hampered by these examples I've given, we can insist, we can advocate, and the voice of the bar is a strong voice, is a voice that will be respected by the executive. That appointments, and I will advocate a quota system here, having heard and aligned myself with all that Linda has said, on a 50-50% basis. You only need what, 30-something for the ministers? Tell me, I mean, there's no way you cannot find 20 competent women equally meriting that position to be ministers in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So let's start from there. It has to be 50% women, 50% men. And then we will find that it is in the boards, for instance, publicly quoted companies. The Nigerian Bar Association can advocate Securities Exchange Commission, for goodness sake. All PLCs should have 50% women representation on the board. We have information to show you that women on boards make better boards across the board. So do this. And those small steps will lead to these like little pebbles. Eventually the ripple effect will lead to a great big waterfall, and we will find the gender change and equality, parity that we want.
Boma, honestly, I know there's a reason that you're an inspiration. I would say Boma for president of Nigeria, really, but I know that's not what you want. But Terry, you want to say something, and I want to ask Dame Linda about how she became QC, but please go ahead.
It's a quick point, and it relates to what Dame Linda and Boma just said. As far as the women on boards issue, we've done studies in the United States, and the same thing. The most successful companies have diverse boards and successful financially. But it's more than that. Here, the clients are pushing diversity because their client base, the consumers and others, are really insisting that more and more of our companies be diverse in all aspects of their operations, and that's extending into the legal world. So if it hasn't already started, I think it's coming your way. Having the clients push for diversity and meaningful diversity on their matters, whether it be a litigation matter or a corporate negotiation, and say, we want women on these, and they're not just to show up for the meeting and say, hey, Dame Linda is one of the people working on this case, and they never see her again. They are asking for meaningful work on it. And with the push from clients, the law firms have had to, management at law firms has had to sit up and take notice. And now the things were, they're counting statistics and targets and quotas in the past and just checking off the boxes. Now they're starting to take it seriously and say, you know what, we really do have to have women on our management teams. We have to have women leading the cases. There have to be, lead women on the corporate deals. So I think a second avenue of assistance here could be your clients and to engage them. So I'll stop with that.
No, actually, Terry, I think that the audience will be, really, really interested in hearing more about this meaningful diversity being pushed by clients. I think that's a really important point. And I'm going to sort of have Dame Linda talk about that a little bit, if you would, about how to actually get meaningful diversity. I also want you to talk about your, how you became QC, which is Nigeria's equivalent for SAN. And what you think. I mean, I don't know how many women QC that we have in the UK, but I think we have very few in Nigeria. What should we be doing to get more SANs? Because these SANs, people like Boma, people like all the women I know, many of them are not SANs, but they are heroes. We look up to them. And if our heroes are not SANs, or should we say sheroes? If they're not, then what hope do we have? So Dame Linda, if you don't mind talking about how you became QC, what you think we should be doing to have more SANs, because that's very important for this particular audience.
The system under which I was appointed is different from the one it is now. The system of appointment as a silk now is much fairer than it used to be. Still, having said that, only about 10 or 12% of QCs are women. One of the problems they had was, and it goes back to what Boma said, they used to, you had to put in how much your income was. And of course, the women's income was usually lower. Their turnover was usually considerably lower. And certainly if they'd been away on maternity leave or anything, or any other reason, not even maternity leave, but working part-time because they're looking after the children, their income was lower. Finally, they recognized that this was an issue. So whilst they still look at your income, you now have the opportunity to say why your income was lower. So in the days when I got chosen, really, it's not very helpful because it was the old system. The new system is fairer, but what has been identified as the problems are, and this was something I worked on at the bar when I was chair of the Race Relations and chair of the Criminal Bar Association, was fair access to work. Because at the bar, not the same as in the solicitor's profession, at the bar, the work would come into you. When you start off at the bar, it's really your clerks that are building you up. They allocate the work to you, and then you, by diligence and by good relationships with your solicitors and things, will build up your practice. But to begin with, you're very much relying on the clerks. And that's where a huge amount of discrimination used to come in. The clerks used to think that women were only good for family, only good for prosecuting. We don't want you defending because you haven't got the balls to defend, to put it bluntly. So fair access to work is very, very important indeed, because they'd always hand the sexy cases they'd give the women the sex cases and give the sexy cases to the men. So that's one of the major reasons for that disparity. The other one is the attrition rate, which is connected often to maternity leave. Although maternity leave is mandatory now, at the bar in particular, a barrister will go away, have children. They're forgotten. They're forgotten by their chambers. They're forgotten by the solicitors who brief them, instruct them. So when you come back again, I've spoken to women who've come back in practice. They say it's like starting all over again. So their income has gone down, and so they're starting all over again. So they're likely to take silk much later in any event. So you need to have, all these measures need to be considered, ways of supporting women who have time off to ensure that they don't get out of the loop. So for instance, why not encourage solicitors to send paperwork and written work and advice work to the women whilst they're off, rather than nothing at all. So that's just, one idea. So we need support mechanisms, but those seem to be the key areas. And of course, when they go back, the women, if they aren't doing so well, then they leave. So you've got people, I've seen people leave the bar who could have got silk, women leave the bar who could have taken silk if they'd stayed on, but they were too dispirited by the whole struggle. So I think really those are two sort of key areas where there's a problem. The point that Terry raises, some years ago, it was actually headed by, and I've completely forgotten his name, and I did work with him. He was a chap at Barclay. If they aren't doing so well, then they leave. Counsel at Barclay. So you've got people, I've seen people leave the bar who could have got silk. Oh dear, this is coming back at me. I can hear myself coming back at me. But they were too dispirited by the whole struggle. So I think really those are two sort of key areas where there's I'll wait till it finishes. A problem. The point that Terry raises, some years ago, it was actually headed by, and I've completely forgotten his name, and I did work with him. He was a chap at Barclay. They aren't doing so well. They're the counsel at Barclay. So you've got people, I've seen people leave the bar who could have got so. I can hear my. Wow. Okay, I think that's stopped now. All right.
Hello.
So I think really those are two sort of key areas where there's.
Hello.
Can you hear me, Nkuru?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, let me just say, this was a chap at Barclays who really spearheaded it, and he got the corporates, and it was like a pledge, a charter that they had of corporates. I think that's something. And they would ensure that they were looking at instructing firms that had were employing minority ethnic lawyers. What's happened to that now, I'm not sure, but this was some years ago and it had a modicum of success. But as one senior partner said to me, one of the city firms, a woman who was in M&A, mergers and acquisition, she said, you're right, the firms are doing that. And she said they're very good till it comes to, you've got some great big deal happens and suddenly all the equality and diversity issues go out the window, because if you say you've got to go off and see your kids at 10 o'clock at night, absolutely not. You've got to be huddled in that room all night and all day for the next weekend in order to get the deal through. So she said it tends to sort of fly out the window, the principles, when it comes to the practicalities. But certainly there was that charter. There's a move at the moment for another charter in the financial sector. This is more in relation to Black people, but there's women in finance, for instance. So there are these pockets, and a bit like Boma's saying, small steps. But if you can get pockets like that and get people, you start targeting the corporations, the corporates, and you start targeting actually the public sector as well, to ensure that counsel in the public sector, that their briefing patterns or the work that they're sending out is equally distributed, and that they are encouraging the firms to give the particular brief to a woman. So I think you need to be proactive. But can I just have one thing on targets? Can I suggest as a target for next year that the NBA, we've got about 104 speakers this year. I counted them on the poster. Of the keynote speakers, of which I apparently was one out of 12 was female. That's me. Of the whole 104, about 23 were female. So I think the NBA next year should be looking for parity of speakers. So there will be 50% men and 50% women, and that should be your goal for next year.
Dame Linda, thank you so much. That is actually an essential point. We're going to start rounding up. And the point you're making, because I think Professor Bamboshe is actually one of the only professors, if not the only female professor who is an SAN. My mentor, Professor Chioma Agomor, is retiring soon. I think she's one of the most incredible women in law, and she's not an SAN, if I remember correctly. And so the point about having 50% representation, at least at the MBA, is essential. And so as we round up very quickly, I want to sort of like end on a really interesting light note. We know that a woman is potentially, hopefully, fingers crossed, going to be the VP of the United States of America, Kamala Harris. She's a lawyer, a trial lawyer at that. Terry, I mean, what are your thoughts about that, and how has it impacted, and how do you think it'll impact women of color globally? Because America is, the greatest country in the world. And then finally, everybody say something about that.
Sure. I think it's fantastic. She is our first woman of color to be nominated for vice president or president. I think this is going to have an enormous impact on women of color, all women, frankly, but definitely women of color. And I think she's already started to have an impact through just since she's been nominated, but reaching back into her own presidential campaign, and even following when she terminated that and just kind of went back into being a senator. Again, she has consistently reached out to women and girls of color and held out her hand and encouraged them to think big and to be confident. for the United States, the Black women represent a very large portion of the Democratic Party vote. And I think that having her as the vice presidential candidate, and given how she is, that she really is trying to engage and help women of color, I think it's going to be very meaningful for activating that sector of the voting population here. And again, you can see it. There's lots of stories in the news already of how she's reached out to girls as she's been traveling around, and their reaction that all of a sudden they see someone who could possibly be the vice president of the United States within a few months. And their reaction is, wow, maybe I can do it too. It helps. All of these steps help. Kamala has, she's granted not very many interviews so far. The first 3 and possibly all to date have been to women of color journalists. So she's really walking the walk. So
Terry, thank you so much. I'm gonna because we don't want to get shut down without closing properly. I'm gonna say very quickly, thank you to everybody for being here. And if we can be lawyers and do 10 seconds each of closing, what's the most important thing for you as a woman activist, as a Femi, as a gender supporter, please go ahead, Femi.
Right now, the most important thing is the efforts. It's been made. There is no excuse, not in the legal position, for suggesting that it's hard to find the talent. That's just not acceptable. We know
your turn.
For me, it's statistics. That shows what exactly is going on, like Linda just did with the NBA conference example. With that, we can show that things need to change, because we talk about it, but we're not keeping track of what's happening. So statistics, very important.
Thank you, Boma. Terry, quickly, and then we'll have Dame close.
Thank you. I think it's being proactive as women and all the people that you have in your women's forum, in your bar association, to really get out there and push the message and show people that women can and are as equal, if not better in many instances, than the men at our jobs here.
Thank you, Terry. Dame Linda, please close for us. Thank you so much for being here.
Empowering and supporting young talent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This was a great session. This was I'm inspired by all the speakers today. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you very much. And thank you to the NBA Women's Forum for having us all here. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkiru. The moderator, you've been fantastic.
Yes. Prof is here. Prof wants to put in a final word.
Yes.
Well done.
Can Prof say a final word and tell us about the awards? It will be some seconds.
Sorry about the technical itch, but the award ceremony went on live. The vice president was supposed to come in at 2:30, so the studio was live. There was technical itch, but it went on very well. And most of the things that has been said now by our distinguished speakers and our panelists will take it to heart. Mr. President, the outgoing president, has done a lot. He tried from where we started 2 years ago to where we are now. There's a significant leap. But we will try more. And I guess that the incoming president, will do more, because he too has promised us a lot. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting session.
Thank you, and bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank
it was lovely meeting all of you and participating. Thank you for including me.
Thank you,
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. We'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. From a phenomenal session.
We have some
Lovely conversations.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to Chinyere, thank you, and to the ESCO. Good.